Another episode back interviewing. Well, we do this every year. We try to talk to people who are candidates in the upcoming Grand Lodge elections here in Ontario. Uh, today we have got Peter Frederick Irwin, um, Cedar Lodge number 270, Ontario District, Worship Master 1995, Grand Senior Warden 1999. Running for the position of Grand Secretary. So thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me, Cameron.
So I want to start, I talked about this with Right Worship Brother Richard Kaufman when it came to the Board of General Purposes, and I'm going to talk to you about the same thing. I realized I should probably start at the beginning. Before you do anything else, what is the position of Grand Secretary? What does it entail? Because for many years, I joined Freemasonry in 2007. For the first several years of my Masonic career, I had no idea. I knew very little about Grand Lodge or any of the officers there or kind of what it did. It was kind of just this thing that was spoken of off in the distance, and certainly as an entered apprentice and fellow craft and new master mason, I never felt it was relevant for me to learn more, which I do regret now. So for anybody who's watching this who may be newer to the craft or has been around the craft but hasn't paid attention, what is the position of Grand Secretary? What does that entail, and what is its role?
Absolutely. Good question. Well, first of all, I see it as being the quarterback of Grand Lodge. The Grand Secretary is the first person who's contacted if there are questions about the craft, about our ceremonies. They also oversee the office of the the secretarial staff who run the mundane business of Grand Lodge. They oversee expenditures in concert, of course, with the Grand Treasurer. And it's a position with very little glory. You don't go into lodge and have the wands over your head. You don't get offered a chair. It's a working position, and it's sort of the coordinator of everything that happens at the Grand Lodge level.
And going back to what I was saying at the start, why is it important, you think, for or is it important, and then if so, why, for Masons to pay attention to Grand Lodge officers, Grand Lodge positions, taking part in voting, things of that nature, right? What is, I guess, and even more even in that vein, I think you could even talk about why there might be a lack of interest, especially amongst newer Masons, in the Grand Lodge and what it does in the office positions. So I guess it's a three-part question, but we'll start with the start. Why is it important for Masons, whether they be newer Masons or older Masons, to care about Grand Lodge and its administrative roles and functions and the officers of the Grand Lodge?
Yeah, interesting. It's important because Grand Lodge has a direct bearing on a lot of the lodges. And one of my main points in my, for lack of a better word, campaign is it doesn't have enough to do with the lodges. It doesn't focus enough. But mundane things such as the per capita fees that every member pays to Grand Lodge. When your lodge says your dues are X, there's actually a bit of that goes to Grand Lodge. You want to ensure that the people that you're voting for are wisely spending that money, are wisely governing body. Secondly, aside from financial aspects, which is of course very important, especially in these times where a lot of lodges are going dark across the province. It's also the Grand Lodge directs policy, and there's a lot of contentious issues, and they make decisions that directly affect us as brethren in the lodges. For instance, there have been changes to the books of the work, and for some reason, in the last 10 or dozen years or so, there seems to be changes every year, whereas that never used to happen. I remember my dad's 1953 book of the work was still the same as mine when I joined in 1985. So because it's sort of the same as the government in Canada to a point where they have an effect on you as brethren, so you should be interested and make a sound decision on who you vote for.
You used the word, or you described it as mundane. Do you think that, or I've been noticing this and struggling with this since really since the pandemic. It seems that this is kind of an anecdotal experience. I'll be curious what others have noticed or felt. And for good reason, I'm not, I understand why it was done, and I don't disagree with the decision. Oops, as my light goes off. But during the pandemic, when, because we couldn't meet in person, Grand Lodge, allowed for masters, secretaries, and treasurers to basically handle the business of a lodge, the administration of a lodge, I should say, without needing motions and going through a lodge and things of that nature. I think that was it accelerated this tendency for the business, the mundane aspects of a lodge to become the kind of the province of a select few, normally the treasurer, secretary, and master, and two of those are tend to be the same person year after year.
Yes.
While the rest of the members began to focus more on ritual, on social events, but the quote unquote things, the business side of it started to be viewed as those mundane tasks started to become viewed more and more as the province of a select few. Mm-hmm. And since, even though we've been, I was thinking to myself, it's probably been about a year, give or take, since we've been returned to in-person meetings. It seems that inertia is still there, and you still are seeing a lot of the business side of things Masons are not paying attention to those aspects as much as even before the pandemic, and are focusing instead on they're leaving those to a few people. So I guess, have you noticed the same thing? If so, how can lodges perhaps fight against those things?
I have noticed that, and I agree with you fully. And it's something we have to make sure doesn't continue. I guess the best way is by returning to fight this, is to return to our usual operations, and making sure that all expenditures, all changes of any kind, all decisions are brought forward in open lodge for a vote. Now, to go back during pandemic, pandemic was a shock to everyone, and it was a surprise. It's nobody expected that in this day and age. It's something you read about in the history books. So the decision to have the master, secretary, treasurer look after business under those circumstances, I can't really complain about, because that's the way lodge business is looked after during the summer recess. There's usually in the last meeting of the year in May or June, a call made. I'll move that the business be transacted by those three people. So that was a sound decision. I think going forward, if in fact I just read something today that the United Nations are pushing countries to pass legislation in preparation for the next pandemic. That being said, we won't discuss that. that's gets into the realm of politics. But we as Masons, just in case it happens again, should prepare for it. And now that we have things like Zoom meetings, we can conduct business the same way that we have been in lodge, only with a Zoom meeting, and majority of the members vote on it. There can be discussion. So I think that's the way to battle against it. In the past, we now have these type of meetings, Zoom meetings, and so forth in place, and I think that's very important.
There's the battling against it, or trying to reverse that course during, for extraordinary times, for lack of a better term, such as potentially another pandemic or some type of situation where it's necessary. But it seems to me that there's just a natural inertia right now towards that, even without the pandemic. I mean, if you compare, for example, the attendance at a business meeting to the attendance at a degree to the attendance at a social function, brothers seem to be voting with their feet and implicitly, if not explicitly, placing a greater and greater emphasis, or placing less and less emphasis on the administrative tasks of a lodge. I've had brothers suggest, and I don't agree with this, but I understand where they're coming from. Suggest that business meetings should be done away with altogether. Have it, because the argument goes, well, brothers don't care about the minutes or the bills. Basically, you have your elections for that year. The treasurer, secretary, and master handle the administrative side of it, and the lodge meets to confer degrees and hold social functions. And then you have another installation. So I guess, assuming, and we'll knock on wood, we don't have a need to resort to stay at home or isolation in future. I guess in that case, how can a lodge battle against this tendency for the like I said, for the business and administrative side of it to become seemingly more and more in the hands of fewer and fewer brothers?
Yeah. Now, it's an interesting question, because a lot of it comes down to personalities. And if you have very strong personalities, lodge secretaries, maybe even grand secretaries, I'm not sure, they tend to have strong personalities and be fairly forceful. A lot of brethren will just say, you know what, let them look after business. I think this is where Grand Lodge has a place to step in and educate the brethren and let them know that this is important. It's important that everyone has a say in the running of the lodge. Across the province, in fact, where I live, it's not my, as you mentioned, my mother lodge, a Cedar Lodge in Oshawa, but I actually live a little bit outside that, and I live in what would be considered Prince Edward District. That when I was master in '95, they had, I think, 17 lodges, and they're down to 6 or 7 now, and they're closing left, right, and center. And in these times when that's happening, that's where Grand Lodge should step in and say, hey, it's important for all the brethren to have a say in the running of your lodge. It's not time consuming. Just like keep an eye on expenditures, what's happening, are more members coming in? Do you have applications? It's important for everyone, having 100 people give input is a lot more effective than having 3 give input. So in these days, I think that's where Grand Lodge should be saying to all the brethren in advertising, hey, don't let this opportunity slip by.
Yeah, and I think every member of a lodge, whether you're the newest or the most experienced, right, has a role to play in the well-being of that lodge, or you would hope they would have a role and feel as though they have a role in the well-being. And that part of that comes from understanding the bill payments and the minutes and the accounts and those money, and who is the grand secretary and under what, all of that stuff is important.
Absolutely. And in fact, a long time ago, when our Grand Lodge was formed, somebody recognized that. And if you'll notice, our business meetings are held in the first degree so that the newest Masons can take part in them. They can have a say. Whereas in most Grand Lodges across the world, all the business is conducted in the third degree. And so exactly what you're saying, I think someone a long time ago recognized the fact that, hey, even the newest brethren have a say here. And the more voices that we hear, the more opinions, then we'll come down to a better decision.
Looking ahead, which if my assumption would be any candidate that is running for any office or board or position within the Grand Lodge is doing so looking ahead, what are some things, or what's one thing in particular maybe that gives you optimism about the future of the craft, and also one thing that causes you concern or makes you pessimistic about the future of the craft? And that can either be specific to Ontario, or if you want, you can, the craft in general. But one thing that makes you optimistic and one thing that makes you pessimistic.
Interesting. I would say the optimistic thing that makes me optimistic is that without changing what we stand for, without changing our ceremonies, there are still people, applicants, who are interested and want to become Masons and value this. And I think one of the things that we can do without changing, without like going out and asking candidates, which goes against our rules, but we can let people know that, hey, we exist, whether that's some form of advertisement. It's there's better minds than mine that can make those decisions, but letting them exist, because a lot of newer Canadians, recent immigrants, come from areas of the world where Masonry doesn't exist, or that Masonry is actually looked down upon for various reasons. So I think just like advertising and say, very simply, we exist. This is how to get in touch with us if you're interested, and this is what we stand for. Because the applicants that we have, they're looking to be involved with other upstanding citizens like themselves, and join in. So that makes me feel good. There's all that potential there. Pessimistically, right now, I see a tendency in Grand Lodge, and this is one of the things that rankles me a little bit, to accept lodge closures as inevitable. I think that sometimes that might be the case, but we need to do what we can to stop this. It's I call it a self-licking ice cream cone, because if you think of a rural area where there's a lodge and it's going to close, or say amalgamate with the next lodge that's 45-minute drive away, the members, a lot of them will go, oh, you know, it's a snowy evening. I don't want to drive 45 minutes. And then afterwards, you know, sit around with the guys, and then it's another 45 minutes back. They end up skipping a meeting, and then one meeting turns into two, and then so on, and it snowballs. So closing lodges and amalgamating lodges is a last resort, not a first resort. And that's where there needs to be a change in Grand Lodge direction. And to promote myself a little bit, that's what I would aim to do as Grand Secretary.
And we don't even have to take this at the Grand Lodge level. We can even just look at this from the lodge perspective or the lodge level. Is it a matter of when because I've seen it myself, a lodge struggles, and then suddenly it seems as though it's a foregone conclusion that it will either go dark or amalgamate, or and you know, there has been some work done. For example, I'm on a Cornerstone committee. That's a great example of a series of tools that can be used and are used by lodges that are struggling to reverse that trend. But that tendency for a lodge closure, either going dark, amalgamating, whatever it may be, to feel inevitable. Do you think that comes, or do you think that just comes from lodges membership feeling discouraged, or not feeling like they have support of Grand Lodge, or where do you think that tendency, that inertia comes in, where lodges, it starts to become a foregone conclusion as opposed to something that can be, you know, reversed with time and effort?
I think it ultimately becomes a foregone conclusion. And this is where we have a lot of tools in place. We have a district deputy in each district who visits every lodge once a year and should be highlighting on the report that, hey, we have a lodge that's in trouble. And it shouldn't be even that it's in trouble. They should have the foresight to say, hey, you know what? It's starting on a decline here. Decline could be for many reasons, could be for financial reasons, could be for lack of membership, could be that nobody wants to take the chairs. There's a whole host of different reasons. And the report gets sent into Grand Lodge. So that's one thing that happens, one piece of the puzzle. And then on the other hand, we have a lot of Grand Lodge committees, you know, the brother, the friend to friend, the office of progression, the lodge buildings and finance, and so on. A lot of good committees who have come up with a lot of really good programs. But often that program is up here and the lodges are down here, and the two never meet. You know, they'll set up a seminar somewhere in the district and maybe give a seminar on this, or maybe a seminar at Grand Lodge. But the people who are in the lodges who are struggling, it's almost like, you know, they're drowning. They feel overwhelmed. Like, oh my God, to go to another thing, it's just like too much, and like, hey, we're ready to throw in the towel. What we need is, at the first indication where a lodge is going dark, the Grand Secretary needs to take that and say, look, Grand Master, we've got a lodge here. You need to tell the applicable committee not to make a generic seminar. You need whatever committee can help this lodge, per the DDGM's report. You need them to descend like a horde of locusts on this lodge and deal with their specific problem and see what we can do to help them out. Might be that they can't, but you know what, we need to pull out all the straws to see if we can stop that from happening, and stop the foregone conclusion from happening.
Is it the issue, or how do I put this? The conflict I can see arising potentially is when you have a Grand Lodge, when you have a lodge. Oops, sorry, am I muted now?
You're good now. You were muted there for a couple of seconds.
All right, I'm back.
You're
All right,
back.
we'll try this again. I'm too lazy to edit that out, so this is going to be a dead spot in the thing. No, I'll try to fix it. When you described it as Grand Lodge, kind of swarming onto the troubled lodge, right, to try to turn it around if it has, if it's in trouble and has started to reach a point of the membership is so discouraged that it feels that going dark is, or amalgamating is, a foregone conclusion. I guess how would you, or how can, and really this is just a question that could probably apply to any Grand Lodge anywhere, right? How does a Grand Lodge navigate that relationship? Because uh, if you have and this even goes back to what we talked about at the start, right? A lot of members may not feel as though they have a relationship with their Grand Lodge, but
Yeah.
if a lodge is feeling as though it wants to go dark, and then you have Grand Lodge coming in trying to stop that from happening, um, how does a Grand Lodge navigate that relationship and deal with whether it be um, kind of the bristling of members of who is Grand Lodge to come in and try to fix our lodge, or whatever it might be, especially if, as you pointed out, you get to the point where you have a few, a small percentage of members doing a lot of work, getting tired, and then Grand Lodge is coming in on top of that. I guess how do you navigate that relationship? And that can even be a more general question, right? How do you navigate that relationship between your Grand Lodge and your individual lodges, whether they be struggling lodges where you would assume there'll be a little bit of animosity or challenge with that relationship, versus the struggling, versus the conditional lodges, or the lodges that are doing well, where maybe in that case they may feel that Grand Lodge isn't relevant to them because they're doing fine anyways. How do you find that balance?
That's good, and I think that's the important link. There would be the district deputy grand master and the district secretary. When they make out their reports, um, they should know their own lodges and their own districts well enough and know the people involved to say, hey, you know what, they're struggling, and hopefully get to them before the decision is made that we're throwing our hands up in the air. But that is the important link, to have the knowledgeable local person, the DDGM and the district secretary, to say, hey guys, you're running into this problem. There's Grand Lodge that can help you. We're going to send that report in, and maybe help. They might have some other ideas to keep your lodge going. Sort of on the same vein as having all the members contributing to the daily business of the lodge. Sort of the more ideas, the better. And a lot of these committees on the Grand Lodge level, they have a lot of talented people on them. There's a lot of really good ideas born from a wide range of people. So if they can help the lodge out, great. Um, and so that sort of the smoothing of it, to make sure that there's no animosity, that needs to be the local district deputy and the district secretary. They can be that important link. Um, I understand what you mean. About there could be animosity, like, oh, we'll look after our own business. Grand Lodge bug off. I've heard those exact words at lodge. And but if a lodge is operating well and doesn't have problems, then yeah, so be it. They should keep the nose out. I agree with that. But if Grand Lodge is like this big unknown entity to a lot of brethren, as you said to start the podcast off. This is we should be like we're here to help. And if you're struggling, if there's a problem in your lodge, then we've got a bunch of good ideas that we can come in and see if we can apply them directly to your lodge. So that's sort of my take on it.
The moving on, there's the issue as it relates to, so there's obviously issues in terms of how Grand Lodge deals with a struggling lodge and the extent to which it becomes involved and how involved it should become.
Yep.
Then there's, I think, the more general question, which is, setting aside the health or challenges of any one particular lodge in a district, right? The role of Grand Lodge within a district and the extent to which it can and should be involved. For example, when it comes to things like the administration of Masonic buildings or press for events in the local, right? If for example there's a lodge wants to take part in a I don't know, baseball family baseball day, which is coming up, right? And do they get themselves in the newspaper, and do they need dispensation, and all of those type of questions. And I know, again, this is not, I am based in Windsor, but this is not a Ontario podcast. This podcast tries to examine Masonry and talk about Masonry in all different jurisdictions, right? I guess from your perspective, what is the role of Grand Lodge in those areas when it comes to how Masonry exists within a district, within a community, times when dispensation is required versus not required? Where does Grand Lodge have to fit into those things? Administrate, all of those things that it's not clear to me. Now, it's been a long time since I went to law school. But I did graduate law school, and that is a really interesting, I think, challenge I see coming up. We saw it a little bit during COVID. The administrative side of what is within the province of Grand Lodge, what isn't. I don't know how completely clear it is, and I think that's a really fascinating area, and it's really interesting to me. And having said this, there's certainly no question in my mind that everyone's intentions are good, right? And that's true for across North America, across the world. Everybody is kind of, I think, and I talked to people offline about this. It's just fascinating because everybody in multiple jurisdictions in the States and Canada are having this interesting debate right now about the authority of Grand Lodge versus individual lodges. So where do you come down on it? What are your thoughts on it? I know it's a long question. Go nuts. Have fun with that one.
Yeah, it is a fun one. Well, you know what? I am going to go nuts on you a little bit. It's actually stems from the history of Masonry, because other fraternities, other social groups generally start out with the body, and then they spurn out the subordinates. Probably not the best word to say spurn them out, but anyways, they start out all their subordinate, remote entities that all feed up to the Grand Lodge. Whereas historically, lodges existed before Grand Lodge. Lodges existed a long time before the first Grand Lodge was formed in whatever it was, 1717 or something like that. And really the sort of lodges looking after themselves dates from that time. Whereas in a lot of other organizations, we always have to get the upper echelon to approve this. Ours is a little bit more nebulous, and it comes from the history. And I think where Grand Lodge needs to be involved in that is just again with the wider sphere of knowledge. Just more heads are better than fewer. They want to make sure that when you're advertising, for instance, is it staying within our sphere of being non-political, unbiased towards anybody, to list sort of an example. Doesn't apply here, but say your baseball tournament is being held on the grounds owned by the KKK, just to use an example. That's where Grand Lodge would say, "Oh, hang on, we don't want to be associated with them because of the obvious reasons that they have prejudice that we don't have." So that's really the only reason dispensation is needed, is just to make sure that the group is staying within bounds, that there isn't a conflict with our belief system. As for like lodge buildings that you mentioned, the Grand Lodge building committee is in fact called the Grand Lodge Building Advisory Committee. They're just there to advise. The lodges run their own quarters wherever they may be, and that's the extent of their involvement. It's up to the individual lodges or groups of lodges that meet in a particular building to run their own building. So,
I mean,
yeah, go ahead.
technically, it would be the temple is so like. I mean, part of it is because I'm always wearing like different hats. I don't know who I am sometimes. As you know, from the square and compass side of it, which this podcast, what I have been doing a lot of is trying to promote, or promote and disseminate information about the Windsor Masonic Temples for the Next 100 Years project, where it's been, we've the Windsor Masonic Temple, or the Board of Masonic Temple Association, which administers the building, it has been successful in acquiring grants to make the building more accessible, to improve its energy efficiency, to maintain its heritage features, all those type of things. And so as somebody who both works on that, but then also tries to encourage other Masonic buildings to, and really heritage buildings in general, but especially Masonic buildings to do the same thing, right? You kind of learn a lot about the functions, right? The owners of most Masonic buildings are temple associations, which are separate entities from the lodges that meet there. The membership can
Exactly, and
usually,
that's the way mine in Oshawa is run as well.
yeah, and that's the way most are. There are some that are just tenants.
Yep. I know of many. Yep.
That they don't own their space; they rent from another source. And then there are some where I don't know of any off the top of my head. I don't know any personally. I've heard of some where it's a situation where there is no temple association. It's just a lodge that owns the building, which seems like a very bad idea. I would strongly don't take legal advice from me, but as a general rule, I would strongly recommend against that for liability issues and all sorts of things. You want a temple association to be dealing with those things. But I am really, since I started this project and then started promoting the project about 2 years ago, the issue of Masonic built heritage really has become a real focus of mine. I've been really proud of the work we've been able to do at the Masonic Temple. It's undergoing in Windsor Masonic Temple, which is currently underway and is going to be underway for the next several months, to a year. And yeah, I think, but this podcast has also started to really examine, and Square Encompass Promotions examine preservation of our built Masonic heritage. Anyways, that's a tangent, but it's a really, really interesting area,
It,
and
it
it's super
is, and
fascinating.
it's an important tangent too, because whenever I see a Masonic building that's being abandoned and is being reused somewhere else, where I live in Trenton, that's happened. And the Trenton Masonic Temple, which was built as a Masonic temple, it was an interesting building. And I saw when the new owners, they didn't just cover up the Masonic sign on the front; they jackhammered it out of the concrete. And I happened to be going by, driving by as that was happening, and it almost broke my heart. The and again today, I saw a picture somebody posted about 888 Young Street, the Young and Davenport Temple, which was lost a number of years ago. It was an amazing building. I was in it to lodge meetings, and it's a heartbreaker that was lost. So the keeping of the temples, updating them to bring them up to current building codes, to make them more energy efficient, that is of prime importance.
And there's so many opportunities to do it too. There's so much funding out there, and public funding, private funding. It's a shame that more temple associations, um, if they're lucky enough and they do own their own building, aren't taking the time to look into these things. So I'll give a shameless plug for myself. Get in touch with me. Take a look at it. Create a committee. There's lots out there. And if the worst that can happen, right? If you apply and they say no, you apply and they say no. It kind of goes like to what we were talking about earlier with lodges going dark, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes those things happen. Sometimes you make a decision to sell your building. Sometimes you make a decision to go dark, but you want to make that decision only after you've explored every other option that there is. And if
I
you haven't,
couldn't agree more. That's absolutely right. That
so
should
if you,
be the last choice, not the first choice.
right, absolutely. And if you haven't explored for a building side of it, if you haven't explored opportunities for funding, to renovate the building, to reduce your energy costs, to deal with positive maintenance, there's going to be some issues down. You haven't done your due diligence, I guess, is what I'd say. So
Very true. And you know what? A lot of buildings that I know, Masonic temples, have been smart enough to go out and get as much rental income as they can as well. That's great. Whether it's other Masonic bodies moving in, or whether it's renting out to, fixing up an auditorium area so that it can be rented out for functions, non-Masonic functions. All great. Yeah.
no, and I think that's a great point as well. Buildings were, Masonic buildings were built, especially in the 20s during that boom period,
Yeah.
to have community involvement and businesses and rentals and ballrooms and dances. Two of the most famous concert venues in the world are Masonic temples, right? The one in Detroit,
Absolutely.
the one in San Francisco. They're both called the Masonic.
Absolutely. One in California, in Hollywood, California as well. The Oscars used to be held there.
Well, now it's Jimmy Kimmel's live theater studio. It's where they filmed Jimmy Kimmel Live.
Was it
I
really
was, yeah,
good?
yeah. People don't realize, Los Angeles is a funny place like that because I think because they have some really strong heritage preservation laws, I believe, and also because Freemasonry was so big there in the studio system in the 20s and 50s, you have a ton of Masonic temples that have since been repurposed. So Jimmy Kimmel Live is filmed in a Masonic temple, actually right on the facade, because they can't change it, I think, because of heritage. It says Freemasonry is built, or Freemasonry builds its temples in cities and in the hearts of men.
That's
And it's
nice.
got the
I
square
like
and
that.
compasses. Um, it's if people, Fleetwood Mac recorded Dreams in a Masonic temple. Um, Village Studios.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, Los Angeles is particularly known for that. Although other places like Nederlander Theater, which used to be was called the Oriental Theater for a long time in Chicago. So yeah, so my view on it has always been my ultimate hope. If I had my druthers, would be that a Masons maintain ownership of Masonic buildings.
Yeah.
If for whatever reason that doesn't happen, my hope is that the new owners don't take a jackhammer to the square and compasses, but do their best to maintain the Masonic touches on the facade, whatever it is. Do their best to pay homage and tribute to the building. That's the next best thing.
Yeah, you're right. And actually, the Davenport Temple, the 888 Yonge Street in Toronto, the owners have kept the Masonic symbolism throughout. They've been very, very good that way.
They have, yeah. I've been there a couple times and was very happy to see that.
Yeah.
Well, going back to what we were talking about before we went off on this tangent, but important tangent nonetheless.
I think so.
The role of the Grand Lodge. And I like what you talked about from the history perspective, because you're right. The original Grand Lodge, 1717, came after the formation of the individual lodges of speculative Masons, right? It was the four of them. I believe the first Grand Lodge was formed from four speculative Masonic lodges. Do you, moving forward, this kind of echoes the question I asked before, looking at the history of it to now and now moving forward, as, for example, technology changes, as demographics change. The Grand Master discussed this at a Day of Masonry, which is a very, very, very well put on event. How do you see the role of Grand Lodge evolving in the future, and where do you think it most needs to focus, and how do you think it can evolve to meet some of these challenges that you even discussed earlier, right? Well, how do you see it evolving in the next 10, 20, 30, 300 years,
I wish I had a crystal ball, but where I think it needs to evolve sooner rather than later is to be more of a focus, as I was saying, on the lodges. With the epidemic of lodge closures, we need to, as Grand Lodge, focus on that and help the lodges out. One of the problems with Grand Lodge is that it's a costly entity, and to help the lodges out, because the per capita assessments for the lodges, for the lodge members, are going to increase. They have to increase to maintain the expenditures as they are. But where Grand Lodge needs to go is to, I would say, nothing is off the table. We need to look at all expenditures and look at them critically and without bias, and figure out, do we need this? Is this helping the individual lodges? And that should be the focus of every question. Does Lodge ABC in Windsor, if we have this, does that help them? If we don't have this, how does it adversely affect them? And we need to pare down. And there's a lot of things, as you mentioned, with technology. I'm very glad you mentioned that. That we can do a lot of, and it ties into ecology as well. Like this, driving around the province to go to our meetings. Like if you have a whatever committee, there's no reason that they all get together in a central place and people drive hundreds of miles to go there, burning the gas, when you can do it on Zoom. It's we need to utilize the technology, and a lot of things can be done remotely. And we need to sit back and say, okay, where can we utilize this to maybe reduce costs for the best advantage of our lodges? So you hit on a couple of important points there.
That brings up the question of, or the same question I asked Right Worship Brother Richard Kaufman when discussing technology. Are you surprised, not surprised, or how are you feeling about the continuation of virtual voting post-pandemic? I remember it came out during the pandemic for obvious reasons. I remember I was secretary and still am secretary of my lodge at the time. So communicating the virtual voting method to the brethren for the first time was a challenge in some cases for them. I remember Grand Lodge asked us to go with our laptops to different brothers' houses if they weren't trying to do it, and try to help register them. Now, shameless plug in my area, we have a coffee club at the Masonic Temple, and I like to I usually pick one coffee club during the registration period where I'll come with my laptop, and if anybody wants to register, I'll help you do that. Let's see if we can get Essex to be the highest voter turnout, or at least voter registration. But were you surprised that they continue with the virtual voting, or did you expect it? And what are your thoughts on the new, I guess, technological voting process?
I am 100% behind it. I think it's wonderful. That's my opinion. I've always worked in technology. I'm an electrical engineer. I'm a control systems engineer by discipline. So I'm all over that. I think it's wonderful and it's necessary, and it also helps bring Grand Lodge to the extremes of the province, to the Thunder Bays and the Ottawas and the Windsors that are further away from Toronto. So I'm all 100% for it. Just no ifs, ands, or buts. Am I surprised that they're continuing it on? Actually, yes, and pleasantly surprised. I think that's the right move. I'm happily surprised. I know a lot of post-pandemic, a lot of work, like non-Masonic, like businesses, have gone back to the old way of working, even though a lot of, for instance, a lot of non-hands-on tasks, planning, secretarial tasks, things like that can be done remotely. And in the meantime, why maintain an expensive office? So in the work world, a lot of places are going back to the old way of working and not embracing the new technology. Whereas, there's the first sort of keeping it on here in our Masonic jurisdiction, and I think that's wonderful. I think there needs to be more of it.
The last question I'll give you before we finish this off, and this is my personal opinion. I don't speak for Grand Lodge, et cetera, all the standard caveats.
Oh yeah.
I'm looking forward to being back in Grand Lodge this year, as I do every year.
Yeah.
Any, just from your personal opinion, if you want to speak on behalf of Grand Lodge, any thoughts as to, not that I don't love the GTA, but moving Grand Lodge annual communication around? Because I personally think it'd be wonderful to see it, and I know this was the case many years ago, well before I joined, having a communication in Windsor or London, North Bay, Ottawa, um, even, I mean, the logistics would be a nightmare, but some of these smaller towns.
Yeah.
Just what are your thoughts about a communication outside of the GTA? When you mentioned you joined in '85, by that time I think it was well established that Grand Lodge was in Toronto. I could be
Correct.
mistaken.
You know,
Um,
you were right. Yeah.
so I
It's
mean, it's I think for most Masons alive today, probably don't remember a Grand Lodge outside of the GTA. So, any thoughts as to what would your opinion be about resuming the very old practice of moving Grand Lodge around?
you know what? It's and this is where my mind has changed over the years. I I like the fact that it was in the Royal York. The Royal York, downtown Toronto, was it had the atmosphere that felt like Grand Lodge to me personally, and I'm just speaking personally. Um, and and back in those days, I would have stood on the highest soapbox and preached, no, Toronto is the capital, stays in Toronto. I've got to travel in. Everyone else can travel in, and the Royal York is where we keep it. Now that being said, um, I understand the reasons why it was moved from the Royal York. Um, a lot of good reasons, a lot of unfortunate reasons, but it was clearly necessary, and I agree with the move. The new venue is quite nice, and that I see as being the first step to maybe moving it to some of the other areas of the province. We're unusual in that we encompass such a big territory. We're we're very unusual as a jurisdiction that way, that we have such a large square mile, square kilometer of territory that we cover. And so moving it, maybe not to the smaller towns, but to the bigger towns, have it centrally located in the Toronto, and then maybe moving it on occasion to or alternately to hotels in the Windsor, Ottawa, Sudbury, areas. Um, that might be something to look at, and I certainly wouldn't be opposed to it. I think that might, as you were saying, a lot of younger Masons, they don't know much about Grand Lodge, and they see it as a foreign sort of thing up there in the ether. Um, by moving it around and giving more people the opportunity to attend Grand Lodge, that might be the answer to that, and make it a little more a closer knit family that way.
Well, I will I'll throw the pitch out there to anybody who's listening. I think Grand Lodge should look at moving around a little bit. You already moved a little bit, so
Yeah.
what's a little bit more up or down the 401 for the first one, anyways, and then we can maybe start to think about some other places after that. All right, sir, thank you so much for taking the time. Like I said, open invitation. So anybody who's running and wants to be on the podcast can get in touch. I believe I sent out an email to everybody. And once again, I'll give my shameless plug regarding voting. If you're in, Windsor, but really the whole district, because it's Essex County, and you want to register to vote for the district deputy grand master or for Grand Lodge, and you don't know how, I'll be at our coffee club, which I've talked about, done videos about before. So swing on by. I'll have my computer, and it's very, very easy to register you to vote. And it goes back to what we discussed way, way at the start of this podcast, right? It does affect you, or it does affect your Masonic journey who the district deputy is, who is in Grand Lodge, what Grand Lodge does. So you should try to be part of it, and that includes trying to, being part of the voting process, and also just showing that support. Even if your district deputy candidate, for example, is running unopposed, that doesn't mean that you should take your vote for granted or think it's not important, because a district deputy that's running unopposed, but that gets 50 votes of support versus one who gets 1 vote of support, right? That says something about how the district views them. So it's very quick, it's very easy. Make sure you take part in the process.
Excellent. It's been very enjoyable, Cameron. Thank you very much for the invitation.